The forest never tells the truth the first time. That was something every veteran who ever patrolled the northern frontiers seemed to agree on. The woods, vast, silent, covered in a pale mist that never lifted, had a way of bending stories, stretching memories, swallowing entire days without leaving any trace behind. But on this particular mission, the forest didn't just bend the truth. It revealed something none of them should have seen. The story begins in late October, during a multinational training exercise tucked along the border of a remote mountain region known for its freezing winds and abrupt snowfalls. Soldiers from several units had been rotated into the area: reconnaissance teams, engineers, radio operators, and one small four-man squad known internally as Echo 6. They weren't special forces, but they were experienced, disciplined, and trusted with the kind of patrols that required both patience and nerves of steel. The forest around their temporary base stretched endlessly in every direction, dark pine silhouettes swaying in rhythmic, almost hypnotic movements. Villagers in the nearest town refused to enter after sundown, whispering about ancient guardians, lost travelers who still wandered in the form of pale shadows, and an old legend about the one who watches from between the trees. But to the soldiers, these were just stories, local folklore, the kind that always appeared in remote regions where the cold lingered long enough to fray a person's mind. Echo 6 didn't believe in legends. At least, not until the night they filmed something that wasn't supposed to exist. The video, shaky, grainy, nearly unusable, was later confiscated, and any mention of it disappeared from official reports. No one could explain the footage. Not the officers who reviewed it. Not the analysts who slowed it down frame by frame. Not even the men who captured it. But before the truth was buried, before the silence swallowed the investigation whole, there were eyewitness accounts, fragments of recovered audio, and a handful of testimonies from the soldiers themselves. And from these pieces, a chilling picture emerges, one that suggests something hunted them, long before they ever realized they weren't alone. To understand what happened, we follow Corporal Adrian Hale, the man who carried the camera. A quiet observer, he was the kind of soldier who saw details others overlooked: the slight shift in wind direction, the unnatural stillness of branches, tracks too deep or too fresh to belong to wildlife. His friends joked that he was part soldier, part ghost himself, drifting silently through the woods with a strange intuition for danger. But even he admitted, years later, that nothing could have prepared him for what they encountered that night. It began with a missing patrol. Neighboring squad Sierra 2 failed to check in after crossing a sector known as Grid 7A, a dense stretch of forest that had already caused issues earlier in the month. Compass needles swung unpredictably there. Radios crackled without reason. And once, a soldier reported hearing his own name whispered from behind him even though no one was there. But missing check-ins were rare, and when Sierra 2 didn't respond for nearly an hour, Echo 6 was ordered to find them. They packed lightly thermal scopes, night vision, emergency flares, and moved out under a sky dimly lit by a sliver of moon. The temperature dropped sharply as they entered Grid 7A, and the deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to swallow sound. Their boots crunched over frost-covered soil, breath rising in pale clouds, rifles tucked tight against their shoulders. Hale walked last, filming everything through a small handheld device meant for documentation and training review. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The forest was as silent as always, the air still enough to feel artificial, almost staged. But after 20 minutes, they noticed the first sign: footprints. Not the kind Sierra 2 would leave. These were spaced irregularly, almost too long, as if something walked on uneven limbs or moved with unnatural gait. The tracks were deep, pressed sharply into the frost, and stretched in a direction completely opposite from Sierra 2's assigned patrol route. Hawley crouched beside them, running a gloved finger along the edges. "These aren't theirs," he murmured. Sergeant Miller, the squad leader, nodded. Whatever made them wasn't wearing boots. Animal? One soldier asked. Too big. And too upright. They followed the trail only because it intersected with Sierra 2's last known location. But the deeper they went, the more the forest felt wrong. The path sloped downward into a narrow ravine, and as they descended, a low hum began vibrating subtly in the air. Not a mechanical hum. Not a radio signal. More like a distant resonance, eerie and rhythmic, felt through the chest rather than heard. Hale's camera picked up faint distortion as if reacting to some electromagnetic interference. "We're not alone," Private Reed whispered, scanning the tree line. "Stay tight," Miller ordered, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. They found Sierra 2's trail near a clearing, a disturbed patch of soil. Broken branches, equipment scattered as if dropped during a panic. But no bodies. No signs of firefight. No footprints leading away. It was as if the squad had simply stepped out of existence, swallowed by the night. Hale recorded everything, his hand trembling slightly. The hum grew louder. And then the forest shifted. Every bird, every animal, everything went dead silent. Miller raised a fist. Everyone froze. Night vision revealed movement between trees, just a flicker, a shift of shadow, something gliding rather than walking. Reed swore under his breath. Hale zoomed in, adjusting for clarity, but the image warped each time the figure appeared. The camera refused to capture it clearly, distorting the frame as if the forest itself rejected the truth. Then they heard it. A whisper thin, cold, stretched unnaturally long. Not a voice. More like breath passing through hollow bone. It slithered between the trees, circling them, always too close, then suddenly far, echoing without origin. What the hell was that? Reed whispered. "Nobody fires unless I say," Miller said, gripping his rifle. The whisper came again, this time carrying the faint impression of words. Hale's camera shook as he strained to listen. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language they knew. It was older, deeper, like the murmuring of roots shifting beneath frozen earth. Then came the smell. Rotting soil. Damp leaves. Something old enough that decomposition didn't quite describe it. More like time itself peeling away. Hale turned the camera toward a cluster of trees just as a pale shape slipped behind one of the trunks. This time, the camera caught a glimpse, elongated limbs, skin the color of frost-bitten flesh, joints bending in wrong directions. The creature, or whatever it was, moved without sound, without weight, as if it didn't fully belong to the world it was passing through. Contact left. Reed shouted, but when they aimed their rifles, the shape vanished completely. No rustle. No footsteps. Nothing. They didn't know it yet, but the forest wasn't showing them the creature. It was showing them its shadow, the impression it left behind, while moving between layers of the world. And then the screaming began. Not human. Not animal. A layered, overlapping wail that sounded like dozens of voices, crying, begging, warning fused into a single unbroken howl. The camera crackled with interference. Trees trembled as if pushed from inside. And somewhere far behind them, a second scream answered the first. Hale whispered, "There's more than one." Sergeant Miller's facade of control cracked. Fall back, now. They moved fast. Too fast. Panic made their steps uneven, breaths ragged. The forest seemed to close in, branches clawing at them, mist thickening until the world shrank to a narrow tunnel of white. The whispering returned, louder, overlapping, pursuing them like a chorus of unseen mouths. Hale kept filming even as his lungs burned. The camera captured something impossible, tree shadows bending, distorting, reaching. The forest wasn't reacting to the creature. It was reacting to them, as if guiding them, pushing them, herding them towards something. And then they heard footsteps. Heavy, measured. Behind them, something was following. Miller shouted, "Don't look back." But Reed did. And the moment his flashlight swept across the trees, the beam caught a shape standing completely still, tall, motionless, featureless except for two hollow recesses where eyes should have been. Halle turned the camera involuntarily, and the forest blacked out. The footage cut into static. What happened in those next few minutes remains unclear. The camera recovered only fragments, blurred frames, disjointed audio, snapping branches, shallow breaths, a metallic scraping sound that didn't match any gear they carried. But according to the survivors' testimonies, they weren't running anymore. They were somewhere else, somewhere the forest had never intended humans to enter. A clearing, circular, silent. The snow-covered ground was strangely warm. Trees bent inward unnaturally, as if bowing. In the center stood a stone slab covered in etching symbols that predated any known language of the region. Private Reed dropped to his knees, clutching his head, muttering incoherently. Miller tried dragging him up, but Reed's eyes were wide, unfocused, staring at something none of them could see. Halle, still holding the camera, felt a vibration under his boots, as if something beneath the earth was waking up, stretching, remembering. Then the whispering ceased. The forest inhaled. Every tree leaned outward as if recoiling. And from the slab, something lifted. Pale, thin, unaffected by gravity. Halle whispered, voice barely audible on the recording, "Oh God." It wasn't chasing us. It was leading us here. The camera recorded 6 seconds of the impossible limbs unfolding like branches, joints rotating with soft cracking sounds, a face forming where there had been none. The creature hovered, turning toward them slowly, almost curiously. Reed screamed. And the world shattered into white. Static consumed the video. The next clear frame showed daylight. The rescue team. A medic leaning over Halle. The others from Echo 6 alive but shaken beyond recognition. Sierra 2 was never found. The clearing vanished. No traces of symbols. No signs of disturbance. As if the forest had closed the door it accidentally opened. The official report concluded. Exposure-related hallucinations brought on by extreme conditions. But the footage, even corrupted, was undeniable. Something was there. Something intelligent. Something ancient. Something that didn't want to be filmed. And Echo 6 filmed it anyway. The military buried the evidence. The forest swallowed the truth. And the survivors lived with the knowledge that the world was not as empty as they once believed, because sometimes the things that hide in the woods aren't hiding at all. They're waiting. They say that memory changes when the mind can't bear the truth. That trauma reshapes what the eyes once witnessed, softens the edges of horror, or buries the unexplainable in fragments too broken to reconstruct. But for Corporal Halle, the memories did not fade. They sharpened. Every night after the incident, the same sound woke him, a layered chorus of whispers moving through the dark, as if the forest still breathed inside the walls of his room. Echo 6 was evacuated from the mountain within hours. Their gear was confiscated, their statements taken in cold. Fluorescent-lit rooms where stern officers wrote notes that never appeared in any official files. They were told repeatedly that they had suffered a shared stress reaction, that Sierra 2's disappearance could be explained by weather, disorientation, or animal predation, that the distorted footage was the result of damaged memory. Cards, but even the investigators couldn't hide their confusion. The corrupted recordings showed 37 seconds of impossible data frames that should not exist. containing shapes and movement patterns no wildlife expert or analyst could classify. Hale watched their faces as they replayed it, saw the way their pupils widened, saw how their shoulders stiffened whenever the pale figure flickered on screen, and he saw fear. Real fear. Fear from men trained not to show any. But after the questioning ended, after Echo 6 was dismissed, the silence began. The team was temporarily stationed at an outpost near the valley. It was meant to be a rest period to recover, to decompress, as the officers phrased it, but the outpost brought little comfort. The surrounding mountains cast long shadows across the courtyard, and whenever the wind blew from the north, it carried with it the scent of pine, soil, and something Hale couldn't name. Something that reminded him of the clearing. Sergeant Miller changed first. He stopped eating, stopped speaking unless necessary. He sat at the edge of his bunk at night, head lowered, hands clasped tightly as though praying, though his lips never moved. Once, Hale woke to see him standing by the window, eyes locked on the dark tree line miles away. Private. Reed deteriorated faster. What began as restless nights turned into trembling fits, sudden panic attacks, and moments where he seemed to drift into a trance. He insisted he could hear the whispers through the walls, that the forest was calling him, that something had followed them out. On the fourth night, Reed woke everyone with a scream so sharp it rattled metal frames. He stood in the middle of the room, pointing at the corner. "It's here," he whispered. "It found us." But there was nothing. Only shadows cast by the hallway light. Hale recorded Reed's episode unintentionally. The camera had been resting on the nightstand, still set to standby. In the recording, Reed's voice trembles, pleading with something unseen. But what chilled Hale the most was the audio distortion, soft at first, then unmistakable, a background hum. The same hum that vibrated through the clearing. The same hum their radios had captured before Sierra 2 vanished. Reed was removed from the barracks the next morning. Medics said he needed rest, observation, nothing more. No one saw him again. Officially, Reed was transferred to a medical facility in the capital. Unofficially, rumors spread among the ranks. Someone claimed Reed went silent halfway through the transport. Another said he tried to escape, running barefoot through the snow. Another whispered that the transport vehicle never reached the facility at all. Hale tried to get answers, but officers shut down every attempt. "Focus on recovery, Corporal. That information is classified. Drop it." But Hale couldn't. Not when the nightmares grew worse. Every night he saw the clearing, saw the stone slab, saw the pale figure unfolding itself. But in the dreams it turned toward him more clearly, its hollow eyes focusing, its limbs stretching outward as if reaching for him directly. Sometimes in those dreams it spoke, not in whispers, in a voice cold, ancient, heavy as earth. A voice that said his name. 7 days after the incident, Echo 6 received orders: return home. The exercise was postponed indefinitely. The forest region was placed under new restrictions. Teams were rerouted. Maps were rewritten. And every trace of the clearing, every record, every patrol route was quietly erased. But trauma does not obey orders. As they boarded the aircraft home, Hale glanced through the window. The mountains stretched endlessly beneath them, covered in veils of mist. A familiar chill crawled up his spine. "Do you feel it?" he asked Miller beside him. Miller didn't answer. His eyes were glassy, fixed on the horizon, on the endless line of trees fading in the distance. Hale followed his gaze for a moment, just before the mountains vanished behind clouds. He thought he saw it, a glimmer of pale movement between the pines, far too tall to be human, standing impossibly still as if watching the aircraft depart, a shadow among shadows, a guardian of the forest, or its prisoner, or something far older than either. The cloud swallowed the view, and the moment passed. But Hale knew what he saw. The same feeling he had in the clearing returned, not fear, not panic, but recognition. As if the creature remembered him too. Months passed. Hale returned to civilian life with an honorable discharge. The military called it stress recovery. His family called it a blessing. But Hale carried something with him, something heavy. Invisible, strapped to his mind like an unremoved pack. He tried ignoring the nightmares. Tried ignoring the whispers. Tried convincing himself it was all a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But one night, he woke at 3:14 a.m., the same time every nightmare ended, and he heard it again, the hum, not from his dreams. From outside, he sat up slowly, heart pounding. The window was open. Cold wind flowed into the room, carrying with it the scent of pine, damp earth, and that faint trace of rot he had tried so hard to forget. A shadow passed across the yard long. Stretched wrong. Hale grabbed the camera instinctively. The same camera that had captured the clearing. The same device he had been unable to part with. He turned it on, aimed it toward the window hands shaking, and hit record. For 3 seconds. The screen showed darkness. Then a pale shape entered the frame. Standing just beyond the fence. Tall, still, watching. Exactly as it had in the clearing. Whisper slid through the open window, soft, cold, impossibly close. Not calling his name this time, just one phrase. You saw. The figure remained motionless, waiting, almost inviting. Hale stumbled back. Breath shallow. He knew what this meant. The forest had not released them. The creature had never stopped following. The clearing was not a place. It was a doorway, and he had crossed it. The screen faded as Hale dropped the camera. The recording continued, capturing only audio, now shallow breaths, the slow scrape of something along the fence, and, faintly, the hum swelling like a low chant. Then, silence, a long, dreadful silence, followed by the camera falling sideways. Lens cracked, capturing only a single, blurred frame of the night sky. The last image ever recorded by Corporal Adrian Hall, because some doors, once opened, never close again. Some forests never forget the footsteps of those who enter. And some things, ancient, patient, watching, wait years for the right moment to return. And when they do, they come in the quiet, in the cold, in the shadows just outside Th. In the days after Hala disappeared, the world went on as if nothing had happened. Cars still passed up and down the street. Neighbors still shoveled driveways. Mail still arrived, stacked neatly against the door he would never open again. But inside Hale's small home, a different story remained, one captured only by the damaged camera recovered from the scene. The investigation was swift, sterile, and incomplete. Officers inspected the property, noted the broken latch on the window, recorded the camera's damaged state, and cataloged Hale as missing under unusual circumstances. But their report avoided the most important detail, the faint trace of pine-scented air lingering in the room, impossible for a neighborhood miles from the nearest forest, or the muddy footprints found near the fence, prints too long, too narrow, shaped in a way that resembled no animal known to the region. The camera was boxed, stored, forgotten. Almost 2 weeks after Hale vanished, Sergeant Miller received an unmarked envelope. No return address, no official stamp. Inside was a single SD card. His blood ran cold. He didn't need to guess where it came from. He loaded the card into his laptop, hands trembling despite the years of discipline carved into his bones. The file was corrupted at first, static and broken fragments, but after several attempts, the screen flickered, and the final recording played. It began with Hale's frightened breathing, uneven, rapid. The camera lay on its side, pointing upward at the night sky, the cracked lens giving the stars a fractured halo. A shadow crossed briefly over the frame. Not human. Not natural. Miller swallowed hard. Then the whispering returned, not distant. Not drifting, close. Too close, as if spoken directly into the Chio microphone. The screen glitched, flickered. Then something shifted the camera slightly, turning it as if nudging it with delicate precision. The lens aligned with the window. The shape outside stood impossibly still, watching the same pale limbs, the same hollow face, the same unnatural stillness. It leaned closer, the faint outline of its elongated frame filling the window. The whispering grew louder, layered, overlapping in tones human ears weren't meant to decipher. The words stretched and folded, forming something almost understandable, something close to language, yet older. Deeper. Then the creature lifted a hand, if it could be called a hand. The limb extended, bending in ways joints shouldn't bend, reaching toward the window with a slow ceremonial grace. The air around the lens distorted, warping as if heat rose from the creature's skin, though the night was cold. The hum returned, vibrating through the speakers, so low that Miller felt it more than heard it. The creature's fingertip, long, smooth, almost bone-like, touched the window pane, and the glass began to melt, not crack, not shatter, melt, warping softly like wax held near flame. On the footage, Halle gasped, not with fear, but with recognition, as if he finally understood something the rest of the world could not. He whispered one final sentence, voice trembling yet strangely resolved. It wasn't hunting us. It was calling us back. The creature stepped through the window. The frame dissolved into white. The recording ended. Miller exhaled shakily, his lungs burning. He sat for several minutes, unable to move, unable to look away from the frozen final frame. A blur of pale light where the creature had stepped through. He knew in that moment, without question, Hale was gone. Not dead, gone, taken, claimed, returned, whatever word humans might use. None captured the truth behind what he had seen. And Miller feared deeply that Halle might not be the only one. That same night, as Miller sat in the dim light of his apartment, the room suddenly chilled. His breath fogged. The air thickened. The faint scent of pine threaded its way through the room. Subtle but unmistakable, a soft hum vibrated through the floorboards. Miller's blood froze, slowly, with dread coiling through every inch of him. He turned toward the window. Fog pressed against the glass from the outside. A shadow stretched across the curtains, tall, still, watching. Miller didn't move. He barely breathed, and from beyond the glass, a whisper seeped through the cracks, sliding cold against his skin, carrying a message spoken not in words, but in meaning. You were there too. Miller closed his eyes. The hum deepened. The window began to bend. And then, in the months that followed, Echo 6 was quietly disbanded. Their records sealed. Their names scrubbed from the official logs of the mountain training exercise. Families were told nothing. Investigators closed their files. The military, as it had done many times before, buried the truth under layers of bureaucracy and silence. But silence does not erase what happened. Not the footprints found near the outpost. Not the corrupted recordings. Not the missing men. Not the whispers that sometimes filtered through radio systems near the region. Soft, layered. Impossible to trace. And certainly not the sightings, because hikers in the northern mountains still report pale shapes moving between the trees. Hunters speak of whispers echoing across frozen ravines. Locals refuse to go near the old forest, warning travelers not with folklore but with fear born from experience. They say the forest has changed. More restless, more alive, more aware. As if something inside it has awakened. As if something that once slept beneath ancient stone now walks freely, seeking the men who crossed its path and the ones who watched the recording they never should have seen, because echoes cling to those who witness the truth. And the forest, in its infinite hunger, remembers every trespass. Every step, every breath, every name, and when it returns, it comes not as a nightmare, not as a legend, but as a shadow at the window, a whisper in the dark, a shape waiting just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting, calling, because the soldiers filmed something in the woods they weren't supposed to see. And something in the woods saw them too, and it never stopped watching.